This is an introduction to, and also kind of a justification of, the starter set of narrative elements that I want my students to master for purposes of this class. Now, I want to stress that for us, narrative elements are a means to an end, not an end in themselves. There are people that study narrative elements as an end in themselves. That specialty is called narratology, and you can find narratologists sometimes in an English department, critical theory type people, and sometimes in a philosophy department studying philosophy of literature. But that's not what we're doing, or at least I'm not. If you want to do your term paper on narratology, be my guest. I will read that with interest and pleasure, but it's not what I'm up to right now. So I've got two equal and opposite disclaimers. Disclaimer number one, the set of narrative elements that I'm going to give you, I do not claim is the definitive set. The people have been studying this for a few thousand years now, and they keep coming up with new ways to cut up the narrative elements pie and have different terms and techniques, and we're not going to try to be cutting edge. I'm not giving you a complete list of all the terms people have ever even used about this subject, nor even do I claim that it is necessarily the best possible subset. You may find that in the categories that we use, the 12 narrative elements in the advanced set or the 6 in the starter set, that there are redundancies or overlap between the categories. Or you may find that the categories don't stretch to cover the entire literary territory, that there are still gaps left between them. I feel that way too. It's not a perfect set. It's just a good enough starting place. That's what it is. However, disclaimer number 2, or call it caution number 2, some students feel like I'm giving them too good a set of tools, a better set than what they need for their purposes, either because they don't like to think analytically about what they read, just read for pleasure and that's it, or because they want to compose in a completely instinctive manner without thinking analytically about what components they're putting into their literary craft. If you have those feelings, I understand them. William Wordsworth felt that way before you. We murder to dissect. But this is the wrong class for you, if that's how you feel about it. Let's say that you are an architecture student taking Architecture 101. You would expect that you would have to spend some time studying structures and designs that other architects had used. You would expect that you would have to spend some amount of time studying the raw materials that are used in architecture. Wood, bricks, rock, glass, and that you would have to know something about the properties of those materials, that wood burns, for instance, that glass doesn't burn but does break easily, and so forth. What definitely would never happen in Architecture 101 is that you would tour a few cathedrals, and then the prof would turn to you and say, okay, now you build one. Or it wouldn't even happen that you would take a tour of some cathedrals, and then you would be required to sit down and write a publishable article about one. Or even that you would be expected to talk about them knowledgeably, participate in a high-level conversation, intellectual conversation about them, without somebody first having shown you what are some of the things that you should look for. And another thing on that murder to dissect, a literary object is inanimate. It's not going to be harmed. You dissect it and you put it all back together again, it is totally unscathed. I claim that if something is really well put together, dissection is not going to hurt it. And your pleasure in reading it will survive the experiment also. Think of it this way. Who enjoys using their car more? The person who knows every single detail about it and can take the whole thing apart and put it all back together again? Or the person who knows nothing except where to stick the key in, and the way the engine works just might as well be magic from their perspective? These are the 12 elements that I use in my advanced classes. This is the starter set that I use in my introductory classes. I sometimes call this Gene's Literary Six-Pack or Doug Hunt's Six-Pack, because I drew these 6 particular elements from a professor of mine that I had in grad school, Douglas Hunt, who had written a book called The Riverside Guide. Riverside Guide to Writing. The latest edition of the Riverside Guide to Writing came out in the 90s, and you can still find them around, used. But I'm not actually telling you to go out and buy that. I'm mostly just giving Doug Hunt the credit he deserves for having come up with what I'm calling literary six-pack. That's not his term, by the way, nor is it a technical term that anybody uses other than me. That's just my little joke. I call it that for the fun of it, but don't quote me or expect anybody else to understand those words. The Riverside Guide had a rather good discussion of those particular narrative elements, particularly with point of view, where Doug Hunt had some kind of unusual, original things to say. But just the same, this is not a book that I'm going to recommend that you race out to buy. In the six-pack set, the first 3 elements I think are often overemphasized, and I feel like I have to wean my students away from relying on them excessively. The other 3 I think are underemphasized, and I'm going to ask you to try to concentrate on them more than you may have been used to doing in your literary past. From here you can proceed through the other modules. I recommend taking them in the same order they were printed on the slides.